is node-read rules. This is actually a funny joke that you'll get once I get into this and explain it a lot. Explaining always makes jokes better. So what I really want to talk about is automation. And Larry Wall, he's the guy who wrote the Perl programming language. He had these three great virtues of a programmer. And so, and I'll actually read these. It's probably hard to read in the back. But the first one is laziness, the quality that makes you go to great effort to reduce overall energy expenditure, makes you write labor-saving programs that other people will find useful, document what you wrote so you don't have to answer so many questions about it. That's the reason I actually like documentation, is because then I don't have to answer questions about it. The second one is impatience, the anger you feel when the computer is being lazy. This makes you write programs that don't just react to your needs, but actually anticipate them, or at least pretend to. We'll see some of that tonight. And the third one is hubris, the quality that makes you write and maintain programs that other people won't want to say bad things about. So this is a good thing about the PR process too, right? When we do code reviews and pull requests, you don't want to put up some stuff that other people are going to make fun of you about. And I think this is kind of important to us almost as an industry, right? Because these are the things that we do on a daily basis. We write algorithms that automate things. You know, even if you're just displaying like a list of products for your users or something like that, that's really a form of automation, because the things that we do, I mean, could all be also done by, you know, like a person with a piece of paper and a calculator, or, you know, like mailing out mailers and all that kind of stuff. But we want to reduce the cost involved in that. So I think we also, it's good if we apply that to the things that we do on a daily basis. So I don't know about you, but like if you look at my PowerShell profile, it's going to look, you'll see a lot of stuff like this, you know, where I'm just aliasing things. Like, you know, I've got I'm sorry to say, I wrote my own PowerShell commandlet to filter like the output from yarn outdated. You know, it's all these little things that after I do it about 5 or 6 times, I end up saying, you know, why am I typing out this whole command line? I could write a quick little thing to just make it a little bit easier on myself, even if I'm not doing anything more than just aliasing, like git s just runs git with status and -s for the compact view. So tell me, what are some things that you automate? I know some of you guys have stuff that you automate just to make your life a little bit easier, something like that. Anybody got something they want to share with us?
We have a tool that was provided by another vendor, and in order to get down to some of the things that we used all the time, we had to go to dot, and there were sometimes so many dots, and you didn't know what dot those things that you were looking for it was under. So we wrote a wrapper around it so that we would have the things that we need up front, and all the person would have to do is just use that wrapper.
Perfect example. I like that. So you're saving inputs and result in, and so some of you have probably heard of this paradigm already. This is like kind of like functional reactive programming, any kind of flow programming where you have a set of paths that you go through to, you know, start from a start point and end up at one or more endpoints. So the way this works, I've got my terminal over here. So I've already installed Node-RED on this machine, but if I hadn't, it would just be npm i-g Node-RED. Who here is not familiar with npm, the Node Package Manager? Okay, so npm is the Node Package Manager. And what it is, if you install Node.js, and all Node.js is, it lets you run JavaScript on the client or on the machine itself. You know, normally JavaScript runs in the browser. Everybody here is familiar with that. But Node.js, lets you run it on your actual machine itself. You can use it as a server. You can do all kinds of cool stuff here to my console telling me that it's working. Once that happens, you'll notice it tells me where my server is running, localhost 1880. So I can pop over here in my browser, localhost 1880. So here's what I get. So Node-RED gives me this thing. It's sort of like graph paper over here in the middle. Over here on the left in this panel, I have the available nodes that I can work with. And nodes are just sort of like prepackaged functionality that can be start points, middle points, or end points. Think of it almost like a flowchart, but this flowchart actually does things. So to give you just a super quick example of how it works, this is the inject node, and you notice when I hover over it, I get a quick description of what it does. If I click on it, so over on the right, this is my information panel. Let me zoom in. So the information panel gives me kind of like context-sensitive help on each thing, because it doesn't matter if you build a really powerful system. If it's hard for your users to discover what they can do and to know what's available to them, it's hardly going to get used. So I think they did a really nice job with this. So like for the inject, it tells you what it does, and what it does is basically adds a message into the flow that I'm building. So it has this little button here. So if I click the button, that directly injects the message. But if I double click the timestamp, we see it has a whole edit panel that flies out. And you can do things like create a repeating message. So this is already, with this one node, since it has these intervals and at a specific time, you could do a thing at 4 p.m. every day. Or you could do a thing that happens every half hour, every 2 hours, or something like that. Okay, so I've got my timestamp, but we want to see it do something, right? If I scroll down a bit, I have a set of output nodes, and one that we're going to use a lot tonight is the debug node. So this is kind of like, when your JavaScript code, you console log, or you do a similar thing in your C# code. This is just going to let us take in an item that's in our flow in that sequence and log it out to the debug tab that's over there on the right. So I can just drag that onto our page here. So now I have these two nodes, and you'll notice that they also have these boxes here. And this is how we wire these up. So all I do is just click and drag, and I get a line here. Drop it in the debug node, and so now these are connected. So whatever messages that this timestamp node emits, I'm going to follow down this guy just like it's a pipe, and it's going to hit the debug node. Now, you'll notice at the top we have this deploy button. And the deploy button is how you say, I've put some stuff on the page, I've made some changes, I've edited some stuff, let's pop it into action. Because each one of these has a blue bubble in the top right. That just means these are edited, they're new. Like I've put them on the page, or I've made changes, those changes aren't live yet. So when I'm ready, I hit deploy. There's some other options in here, but we probably won't talk about that tonight. So I'm going to hit deploy. Now, I have a few tabs over here on the right. So we saw the info tab. Right now, since I don't have anything selected, it's just telling me about the flow that I'm on. And when you hear flow from Node-RED, it's just talking about these tabs. So you can have multiple tabs, and the tabs give you a way to isolate things. And again, I'll cover that some more later on. But now that I've deployed, so the blue bubbles are gone. I've got my timestamp, my payload. And I'm going to switch over to the debug tab. So currently nothing in it. But if I click the button, it tells me it's successfully injected a timestamp. And if I come over to debug, we see I've got MSG, which is just kind of like the standard convention in Node-RED for the message that came through, .payload. And so payload is also kind of a standard convention in that usually with Node-RED messages, the most important, but not only, part of the message is in the payload. So that's usually the place you look to see like the name of the file that you're monitoring in your file monitor, or a result you got back from an HTTP request or something like that. But what we can do is on this debug node, I can tell it which property of message I want to view, but I can also just say, show me the entire message object. So I'm going to go to that, hit deploy, run this again, and now we can see, oh, we've got some more stuff. So we've got a message ID, and this just gives us a way to uniquely identify the message that came through. We've got a topic. Again, this is kind of like it's exactly what it says. It's like a topic that you can use to kind of classify messages. And then the payload, which we already saw before, which in this case is just the timestamp. Questions so far? Okay, all very cool, but what can we do with that? So over on this tab, now I've got a couple nodes I've already put on the page just because they had some stuff I didn't feel like retyping, and you probably didn't want to watch me retype. But we're going to do a couple things that are almost useful on their own. So one thing that I might want to do, I'm going to zoom out for a sec. I'm going to grab my Windows Explorer, and let's say that I have a folder like this temp folder in my downloads directory. I want to monitor this folder. And when a file lands in this folder, I want to send it to myself or somebody else in an email. Okay? That's actually a useful thing that we could do something with. I'll show you how quick it is to set that up. So here we are back in Node-RED. I'll zoom in a moment, but let me get down to, here is the watch node, already built for us. Watch is a directory or file for changes. So I'm just going to drag this, drop it on the page. Now when I double click it to see what the options are, notice for one thing it has in addition to the blue bubble, it's got an orange one, hazard symbol. So this one just says there are some required fields on this node that you got to fill out before it's going to do anything. So it has its own properties window, just like we had in our inject. And again, over here, if you want more information, just swap back over to the I tab, and it tells you all the stuff about, how this works, what it takes in, what it does. What I'm going to do is just grab that path to my temp folder, switch back over, paste that in. Now this is JavaScript, so backslashes don't make it happy. I'm going to double those up. So what this is going to do is just watch that temp folder for me. And if I just say done, it gives my node a name, and that name is just taken from, I guess, like the most important property, which is the path. But I can change that because it has a name here. So I may name this something friendly like temp folder. Then I get that name. So what this is going to do is put a message in my flow, but what is that message? So we probably want to look at it first before we figure out what we can do with it. So I'm going to get our buddy, the debug node, wire it in. I'm going to say for the debug node, let's get the whole message, not just the payload. Then I'm going to deploy it. All right, so, I can't see where I'm, yeah, there we go. So here is my folder. I'm going to grab a file. This is just a text file that I've got sitting here. Copy that. And I'm going to paste in that text file. Once I swap back over, go to my debug tab. So I've got a new message. So if I check this out, we see once I paste it in that temp file, I get the name of the temp file here in my payload property. And I get some other stuff too, like I've got the size of it, I've got the type, which is file. So I know that the rest of the nodes in this flow that I'm working with, they can use that payload to grab the path to the file. Okay, so we can build on that. So I went ahead and already created this one. So what this is going to do, this is a change node. And this lets me add one or more of these items that just let me do transformations on messages that come through it. You can do this with plain old JavaScript. Like there's a function node that you can put in that gives you the full power of JavaScript. You can do message dot whatever. You can do tons of stuff in it. But you can also take this approach, and you can do it in a more declarative way, a more visible way that's going to be clearer to somebody else who comes through this system. So like I'm setting the attachments property to this JavaScript expression, and it has some nice stuff. Like I can hit this 3 dots, and it gives me an expression builder. So what I'm doing is I'm building up the message object. I'm transforming it a bit to make it work with the email node. Okay? So I'm creating this attachments, and the information to do this is in the information for the email node, which we'll see in a second. So I'm setting the attachments property. I'm setting a payload, which is going to be the body of the email, and then a topic, which is going to be the title. Okay, pretty easy. So to make that work, I'm just going to wire right into it. Then I've got an SMTP node. So this is just going to connect to Gmail. Gmail lets you use SMTP if you authenticate. So I authenticate with my credentials. That's all there is to it. Connect that one in. Deploy it. Clear out our debug log. And I have my inbox over here. Okay? So switch back over here. I'm just going to paste the same file again. It'll send another message just like it did. So once that goes, boom, super quick. So now I've got an email that has the body that I specified. It's got the file actually attached to the email. And so this is the thing that, like, you saw me do this. I mean, I didn't type all the stuff right then, but this is, you know, literally like 5 or 10 minutes to do a thing that if you had to write this with one scripting language, you know, PowerShell, Node, something like that, just the setup for it, you know, to make this thing trigger based on a watch or, you know, a schedule every 5 minutes or something like that, just that part is going to take you a while to get set up. But in this case, it's like 5, 10 minutes. Super easy. Okay, so next thing is, so why don't we try making something that has an API endpoint, right? This is another thing that takes some setup to do. Like, I know how to do this in Node, but it takes some work to set up an HTTP server. In Node-RED, just going to scroll up and find it before I zoom in. So I have this HTTP node, creates HTTP endpoint for creating web services. So I can drag this over. So the only thing I kept this PowerShell command node just because I didn't want to retype the command line for it, but you'll see it's pretty easy. So for this, I can choose my method, basic HTTP methods. I'm going to give it a URL. This URL is based off of the port that we're looking at now. So we've got localhost 1880. So whatever URL I give it is going to come after that. It's like I can do /free space, give it a name. Done. So this, once I deploy, will actually set up an HTTP listen for me on the same port I'm already on and just gives me a different API endpoint. Now I'm going to wire that over to this command node. So this exec node, this just lets you run an arbitrary executable. So batch file, CMD, whatever you want to do. In this case, I'm running PowerShell, and I'm just giving it a very simple command. I'm using the get PS drive, and I'm grabbing the free space on my C drive and dividing it by 1 gigabyte, just so it is not in bytes, which is almost useless to normal people. That's it. That's all there is to this. Now, one of the ways this works, and we're going to find out by using our debug node, so I'm just going to make sure we get a chance to see the messages that come through that one. So that's the input version for the HTTP endpoint. But we've got to send that back, right? We've got to return a value from the request that came in. So there is a corresponding HTTP response. So I'm going to drag this one over. And I'm going to wire up from the standard out pin on my executable node, drop it in, and deploy. Good question. So we've got standard out, we've got standard error, and return code. Very helpful, like if you want to see if you actually got an error out of that. All right, so now if I do 1880 / free space, so I get a number. I've got the ones cut off a little bit, but I've got 132 gigs free. Now if we look back at node red, go back to our debug. One thing that's kind of cool about the way the debug tab works, I know this is a little hard to see, but you can't see it zoomed in. When I hover over this one, it puts this red border around this message box. So that's the originator of that message. So because you get all your messages in this one debug tab, so this gives you an easy way to see where they actually came from. Now if we open this guy up, so this is the output from that HTTP request. So there's a little bit of magic in here. You can see it has this request and response. So this gives me access to a lot of internals. If you've ever worked with the HTTP server in Node, this probably looks familiar. But you would find out if you don't take the same message from this one and only modify that same one, when you pass it out over here, it's going to give you an error because it has some state in these properties that let it know, okay, this is the socket that made the request, so I can send it back out through that same socket. Because you could have these request and response nodes mixed up. They could be within the same flow. But that's the type of thing it'll tell you if you try to do it. Okay, so that's like super quick, like 5 or 10 minute little things. But we wrote 2 utilities that are like almost useful, right? One to just email me a file watch folder, and another that I've got an endpoint that I can hit from anywhere based on where I route it that will give me the free space on my drive. So you can imagine anything that you could get through the command line or something like that. You could just plug it into this exec node, and you could have an endpoint set up real quick. Not production ready, probably, but when we're talking about automating things, for yourself or for your organization, this is the type of stuff that saves us time over sitting down and creating a C# server or a Node server or something like that.
Right. Could I do something where I create an endpoint? I really like that, how fast you created an endpoint, but that takes a request, makes a bunch of other requests to existing APIs that they have in my infrastructure, and then give me some sort of response back from that?
It's a good question, Jason. The answer is yes, you can. And I'll show you an example of that when I go into, I'm going to show in a little bit my home automation system that I've been working on for years that is based around Node-RED and integrates a lot of this stuff. So I'll show you some examples of, what happens if you do spend some time on it. Okay, so let's pop back over here. That's our quick Node-RED demo. Get full screen. Okay, but then how do we communicate, right? So this Node-RED is running on just this machine. So how do I get information from other machines? How do I have a two-way communication, especially if those are maybe smaller form factor machines? Maybe they're not running Windows, maybe they're running some kind of lightweight OS. Maybe I want to have some kind of fault tolerance, like, does this machine have to be online to get a message? I mean, if we just build it in with sockets or something like that, yeah, it does. But this is an option I found working with home automation. Mqtt stands for Message Queuing Telemetry Transport. Super cool. So it's an ISO standard. It's just a publish and subscribe messaging protocol. So you can publish to a path. So paths look kind of like, summer home / lamp. These are arbitrary, completely arbitrary. You just put slashes where you want to have, where you want to kind of categorize things. You make all this up yourself. It's not a queue, so it's different from something like RabbitMQ. But RabbitMQ actually has a plugin that lets it do the Mqtt protocol. It's like a subset of what Rabbit does, as an example, or like the old MSMQ. So with queues, you could send summer home lamp 10 messages, and they would all queue up. And then you have some consumer that pulls them off. Mqtt doesn't do that. It will at most retain one message if you ask it to. So this is lightweight, just a messaging protocol. The clients can also set a quality of service that determines reliability. We won't go into this a lot tonight, but if it sounds interesting, check it out. And it's very lightweight. So like Internet of Things devices can implement Mqtt clients. And in fact, the broker, which is the Mqtt server, you can run that like on a Raspberry Pi. It's perfectly fine, works great. So there are several servers for Mqtt. Okay, control. I'm actually following the instructions now. Mqtt is one of those, and so this is an Eclipse product. It's open source broker. At home, I use a different one just because it has a direct HTTP interface, so you can publish messages with a post, which is super cool. But this one works really great. It's like plug and play, download it, run it, and it goes. So let's find out. By the way, if you like terminals, this one, Hyper, is really cool. It's written in JavaScript. It looks really nice. It's hard to find a decent looking terminal on Windows, let me tell you. So I'm just going to pop over to the folder where I installed Mqtt. So it just gives me a bunch of stuff, including mosquito.exe. I run it. Now, I already put this on my machine, but I literally did 0 configuration to it. So I just put it here and run it. Once I do that, let's pop back over to Node-RED. Go back to our little test flow that we created here. Node-RED really likes Mqtt. You can see it has kind of like a position of prominence here on the node list. So I'm going to drag over this Mqtt node, double click it. Now, I did, when I was testing this out, I did go ahead and set up the server. So this node, this Mqtt node, it uses a Node-RED configuration. And so the reason we want to do that is because if I hit this edit button, we see here's the stuff I set up that tells it how to connect to that local server. So what we don't want to have to do is every time we drop an Mqtt node on the page is have to go on each one, say localhost, 1833, I might want to set a client ID, I might have a password or whatever. This way, this is a thing Node-RED provides, where nodes can have like global configurations. And so you can set those up more than one. So you just choose the one you want for that node, and it just references information you've already put in. So in this case, we're just saying localhost 1883 is the default port for it. Now, it asks for a topic. So topic is that path I was talking about, like with the slashes in it. A couple cool things about the way MQTT works. Pound is like a wild card. So if I could say like summer home, I don't have a summer home, it would be nice. /pound, this will subscribe to everything under that summer home hierarchy. So I might have summer home / bedroom, kitchen, garage. Or, you know, I might have Columbia office / Arrested Developers and Flying Tigers, which are a couple of the teams that we have in here. You know, they might have additional topics underneath. But if I use the pound, that's just going to subscribe to everything under that topic. And if I use just a pound, that's just going to give me everything. So everything that comes through that's published to that local server, I'll see it. Done. So I'm going to route that to our debug node so we can see what comes out of it. Now let's change our timestamp around. We'll go to our output, and we're going to grab the Mqtt Publishing node. So I double-click that guy. That's that server configuration that I already had defined. You see you can add more, so you could choose a different one. And I'm going to publish to a topic. So let's publish to like test timestamp. Now the QoS, that's that quality of service I was talking about. And this just gives you a way to say like, this subscriber should get every single message, but only once. That's QoS 2. That's kind of like the most restrictive. So it actually does a check to make sure you don't get duplicates. And it also has an ACK to make sure that it got everyone that was subscribed. That goes all the way down to 0. This might be, you know, more of your Internet of Things devices where you can say basically, if I'm online at the time it happens, let me have it. Otherwise, I'm not all that worried about it, right? So that one's one where you can afford to be a bit more lossy. We're just going to do 2. Retain. So here's the part I was talking about. If you set retain to false, then when I publish to this test timestamp path, it's just going to forward it to all of the current subscribers and then drop it. If I set retain to true, it's actually going to hold on to that message. So that's pretty important for Internet of Things because like your motion detector, it might come on to detect motion and publish the event and then go offline, right? So this way, if you set retain to true, you can see what was the last value that I got for this item. I'm going to set it to false here. Done. And then we're just going to wire our timestamp into that Mqtt publish. Going to deploy. Clear everything out. Now, notice under these nodes, we've got this green box and a connected. Another cool thing about Node-RED is it lets you set these things. So this is part of the internal API. Like if you have a function node or something like that, you can set these yourself. Or if you write your own node, you can write your own nodes. It's not that hard. You can have this be like different colors. You can have it be filled in or not. Put whatever text you want here for those. So it gives you a way to give feedback based on what's actually happening in that flow at the time. So I'm going to click my timestamp. And I get my debug message, even though these aren't directly connected anymore. So now this is actually publishing through the broker that we're running. And then since we're subscribed to every message that comes back from the broker, that goes into our message object. And you can see in the topic, we have the path that we publish to, test timestamp. And then the payload is whatever I sent to it from that inject node, which is just a timestamp. We can also see we've got the QoS and retain for false. So how would we actually make that useful? So let's go back to our previous example here. So here we've got our free space guy. We've got our HTTP node that we're publishing to. So what we could do, for example, we could, I'm trying to be sensitive to time here, but we could store the last email that we published on an MQTT path, and then we can read that off, like if we leave the retain on here. And so we could say, whenever I visit my free space API, show me what was the last email that I published. Not useful directly in this, but you get the idea. So what MQTT does is it gives us a way that we don't have to run everything on the same machine. So we can have this split apart in different places. As long as you've got TCP to get to the broker, then you can publish to it and subscribers can pick it up. And it can handle a lot of traffic. Any questions so far? Yes, sir.
What can you put in the message? Can you do JSON, like a big JSON file?
That is an excellent question.
And then also can you do high-def video feeds?
Video, it won't do. So it's fairly low bandwidth, but you can most certainly put JSON in there. In fact, that's kind of like the basis of what I do for my stuff.
Can this do secure FTP, something like that? Would it be able to do that, or or is this more for just internally within the organization, or like for secure FTP? I'm not sure how the credentials would be handled.
Let me show you a cool thing about Node-RED. So this is the Node-RED website. So if you notice, it has this flows thing up at the top. I'm glad you asked that question because I had forgotten about this. So Node-RED has its own library. It's like its own kind of, not quite like NPM, but kind of like NPM, where people can, like, say you just write a flow, like one of those tabs, you can publish that, and other people can take it in and use it. Say you write your own node, like your own specific node, you can publish that too. Other people can use it. And then you can search here for whatever you want. So like if we do FTP, I'll zoom in, but let me get this straight here. So Node-RED doesn't have it directly, but I can just grab one of these. Like here's SFTP. Sorry? Yep, secure FTP. So these are, people have had that need before, so they've written their own node to do it. These are out there. Another cool trick is, since Node-RED is just based on Node.js, in your config file, anything that's on NPM, you can download that, and you can set it in your config file so that you can access it from your nodes. So like if you want to grab...
Extract the whole library and use it.
Sir?
You can extract the whole library from...
100%. So like if you want to use Moment.js, this is like a famous node library for handling times and dates. You can just pull that down, use an NPM, just like how we got Node-RED, and you can say, put that on my global object. And then in all of your function nodes or anywhere that you're working with in the flows on that Node-RED instance, you can access it by whatever property you assign it to. So it's very extensible. Okay. So next up, I'm just going to show a little bit of my home automation. This is kind of a labor of love. Android integration through Tasker. So if you use Android, there's this app called Tasker, which I highly recommend, that lets you automate pretty much anything on your phone. I have a web interface, Google Assistant, and Telegram, and I'll show you some of this stuff. And Node-RED and MQTT are the ones that tie all this together. So first up, I'm going to shut down that Node-RED instance. So I'm going to be using that same port. Then I'm going to do the magic of SSH port redirect tunnels. And now, if I go to 1880, so this is giving me the flows that I have set up in my house. So this is behind my firewall, but I'm just using an SSH tunnel to get there. So I'm just going to kind of point out a couple of the things that I did that I thought were kind of cool. So like this is for, we have some light bulbs in our den, and these are just, like on either side of our TV or whatever. So this is using a node that somebody else wrote that outputs a message at sunrise and sunset. So that way, what I do is I say, and this is the second part of Larry Wall's thing, that you want to anticipate your needs, right? I don't want to have to tell it, hey, it's dark, can you turn on the lights? So it uses this to say, if the TV is on, right, if it sees it on the Wi-Fi network, and it's sunset or sunset occurs, then cut on the lights for me. Same thing, like if we get ready for bed, we cut off the TV, we can just leave. Once the TV drops off Wi-Fi, it'll kill the lights for us. Okay, super simple, right? We're not solving anything massive, curing cancer or anything like that, but it's cool, it's fun, and it makes things a little bit easier around the house. My wife has a fish tank, and she needs those lights to go on and off at a certain time. So you can get a little timer to do that, but you can also do this in Node-RED. So these are just the inject nodes. So set with specific times, and it sets a message to true or false, and then sends that out through MQTT. And like if you look at this, so this is my MQTT broker, and then I've got a path that tells it TP-Link. So TP-Link are these little Wi-Fi plugs that are one of the things I use. Fish tank commands on. So this is just kind of like a thing I came up with, where I have like commands versus status messages and things like that. I used to have my thermostat on this. We got a different thermostat, so that's been deprecated. Programmers love to deprecate. This is for my garage. So you see there's a whole bunch of stuff in the garage. So this does things like when I'm on the way home, so my tasker will report both my wife's location to Node-RED through MQTT. And like if I get close to home, not in the driveway, but close, it'll open the garage door for me. So it's already completely open, because if it opens it when I get to the driveway, that's no better than pressing the button, right? I still got to sit there and wait for it to open. So this opens it early, and then it uses that sunrise and sunset to say, if it's during the day, don't bother cutting on the light, because the garage door is open and there's the sun, so I can see. But if it's after dark, then it'll cut on the light for me. And in the morning, like when I come out, when it's my work time, and it sees motion, like when I open the garage door to go out into the garage, it'll go ahead and open the garage door for me, because it knows I'm getting ready to get in the car and leave. So instead of having to sit in the car and press the button and wait for it, by the time I get in the car, the door's already open. So by writing all of this, have I really saved myself any time? Probably not. This probably took way longer than my entire life. I would sit there and wait for the garage door, but I don't care. I love stuff like this. It feels great.
Wait, what happens if your cat runs into the garage? Does the door open?
So our garage is, we normally keep it closed, so the cat usually can't get in there. Like we have to open the door from the house to get out. But the motion sensor probably would see him. But the motion sensors, you can set them up in a way like that they kind of look upwards, so it misses pets, thankfully. So let me show a couple of ways that this integrates with other services. Probably the coolest one is Dialog Flow. So Dialog Flow was bought by Google. It used to be API.ai. And what this is, it's a system for natural language processing. I think this is the type of thing that might be pretty cool, like for us, if we want to do some actions on Google integration, like with our products or anybody's products. I'm just trying this out at home. But what you can do with this, you create intents. So like these intents are things that it figures out from what I say. And let me give you an example. So we have a bedtime intent. And if you click on that, you see it's got some phrases like sleep time, time for sleep, bedtime, time for bed. So these are ways that you train it to say, these are the types of things I say. But if you hear anything that sounds like one of these, then send an intent called bedtime. Now bedtime is what I'm going to get in Node read. And that's the way I'm going to know, okay, this is the thing that I need to do. Okay, that's simple. But let's get more complicated, because if you got a bunch of devices, you don't want to have to write an intent for every single one, like turn it on, turn it off, all that. Dialog Flow's got you covered. So set on off. Now check out these training phrases. So it understands, because I've already defined these things, it understands the difference between what I want to happen, like on or off, toggle or flip, and the thing that I want to do it to, bedroom light, dim lamps, computer room lamp, all that kind of stuff. So you can set up these entities and these actions. You give it some examples of how it works, and then you can say stuff to it, and it actually happens. I'm going to show you my home webcams. I'm going to let my wife know real quick, because just to make sure nothing crazy is going on. Not that she's crazy. Okay, so we have a number of webcams set up. So like this is in the den, so she's watching TV there. We've got one out at our front door. There's a motion detector that goes with this one. So that goes off, like we've had a couple packages stolen from our door. That hasn't happened since we've had a camera out there and a motion. Like there's our kitchen, but down here you can see the garage. So here's the garage. It's dark. There's a car in there. So over on Dialog Flow, and this works the same if I do it from Google Assistant on the phone, but it's just easier to see this way. So I can say turn on the garage light. And so the response we get is I'm turning on the garage light. And then if we flip back over to the webcams, we'll see that the light is on. So this is super cool because it's very flexible. I can define my devices. I can say these are the actions. Then Dialog Flow handles sending that to me. And then how does that actually work? So with Node-RED, you can set up multiple instances of it. I have two. So I have one that runs kind of like my main rules, and another that runs sort of like APIs and other stuff that I've set up. So this is the one that works with Dialog Flow. So this is the HTTP request node that we just saw a minute ago. So I put this in, I give it an API path, I give that to Dialog Flow. I do some security stuff here to authenticate it. Once that's done, I have this router. And so what the router does is it just looks at the intent. So we just saw those intents, you know, like set on off or bedtime or something like that. And then once the intent comes in, I hand it off to, these are the function nodes that I mentioned. It's like bedtime, if we look at that, this is nothing but JavaScript. And so within that JavaScript, I'm just setting up, okay, for bedtime, when we say that, instead of, you know, cutting off the dimmer in the bedroom and cutting off the bedroom lamp and cutting on the noisemaker that we use at night and cutting on the fan if it's 75 degrees or above outside, I do all that here. So we just say one thing to our Google Home devices that we have sitting around the house, and boom, ready for bed. We got another one for wake up that kind of does the opposite of that.
So you say Google bedtime and then it just goes on?
Yep. We say time for bed. Get up in the morning. You say, "Okay, G, wakey, wakey," and it, you know, it cuts everything back off for you. So this is what I think at least for me, the power of automation is. Like that second thing, if you can try to anticipate the needs that you're going to have, you know, don't open the garage door when I ask you, open the garage door so that it's already open when I get there. You know, at that time of the morning when I usually come out, you know, go ahead and open it for me then. You know, when I've cut off the TV and I know I'm not going to be in the den anymore, go ahead and cut off the lights for me. You know, there's a bunch of stuff like that. But I think this same type of philosophy can be applied to what we do at work, you know, just in terms of making our jobs at our desks better. You know, if you do something 5 or 6 times in a row, maybe think about a quick PowerShell or Batch script or Node or whatever, just to make that a little bit faster. It's not like it's probably going to save you a ton of time, especially the first time or two, but it does, at least for me, it saves me frustration because I get tired of, you know, typing all this stuff out. All right, that's my home automation system, like quick overview of that. Node-RED, Mqtt. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Can you show the code that Code Red actually produces, and how do you deploy that?
That's another good, you got some good questions. So the way Node-RED works, it creates a file. Let me find it. So it creates these flows files, and I'll zoom in on this. Let me open this with an editor. So if you run Node-RED on a server somewhere, then it'll go ahead and create these for you. But the way these look, so here's the config file for Node-RED. Sorry. So you can see this has just like a whole bunch of basically JSON that has the entire configuration for Node-RED. Now, one of the things they've done, so like if you want to back that up, for example, which you know I do, you can just back up the files in that folder. Super easy. But they make this even easier. So like this API.ai flow that I said, this is before they changed the name to Dialog Flow. If you go over here to the menu, you can say export, and you can export that whole thing to the clipboard. So this, all this stuff, is everything that it needs to recreate. Actually, I think I did nodes, so that was probably whatever one node I had selected. But if you want to do the whole flow, sorry, that's the, I think that was the flow. Okay, yeah, that's more stuff, because I think I just had one thing selected. But this is everything you need. If you take this, like if I sent this to you in email and you paste it into your own tab, it would recreate this entire thing I have back here. So they make it super easy to export stuff. In fact, you can select like 4 nodes if you want. You can do the same thing. It'll give you just those 4.
But if you were deploying this on a server, you need that .ai file?
You would
What do you
need,
need to actually run it? You know, say you created website, you know, web endpoints
Mhm.
to do things, and you want to be able to get to them, but you want to run it on a server. How would you deploy all that?
so for that to work, you install Node-RED. Once you get that done
On the server, right?
on the server, this folder is like your Node-RED config folder. Let me zoom in. So like it's got a node modules folder. If you ever work with NPM, this is where NPM installs all those dependencies. So if you pull down Moment.js to use it within Node-RED, it puts it in here like any other Node project. But these items have everything you need for that Node-RED instance. So if you just copy like these text files, these are all just text files.
Deploy your project to your web server.
Mhm.
And it's up and running.
Yep, just flat files, super easy. And there's a lot of configurability, like as far as you know the security that you want to use. There's an excellent dashboard plugin for Node that lets you, like without having to write HTML and stuff like that, you can create your own dashboards for it that show anything you can get out of a flow. And you can have like gauges and text boxes and all kind of cool stuff like that. So if you wanted to have a dashboard for your server, you can pull down like your CPU percentages out of WMI, you know, all this kind of stuff. You can get all that together, and you can make a nice interface.
Just call it PowerShells.
Yep, just like I did with that exec node. So, you know, obviously I've done this for home automation, but I think this has a lot of potential to be used in business as well.
How long did it take you to develop what you've done so far?
a long time, but like most of the rules you see there were, this is like the third iteration of those, because that C# service originally, like I had an XML rule thing that I wrote, and then I used Microsoft ClearScript that lets you host JavaScript inside of C#, and I moved them all into that, and then I moved them all into Node-RED. So I don't know if I have a number for you. It's probably a lot. But you know, once you get kind of familiar with it, it's real quick and easy to write these, because it's super easy to debug things out. It's all very clear because, you know, it's like a flow chart. We're all familiar with those. It's easy to work with.
When you're running this code right inside of Visual Studio Code editor, how do you debug? What debugger? You just use a Chrome extension, or?
So when you use these function guys like this one, so like this is the one that when I tell it turn on the garage light, this is what gets that, but it has its own editor. So this is a function node, and the function node again just kind of gives you direct access to the JavaScript object that comes through in that flow, and then you can emit it or not, and you can emit it on multiple paths or not. So you don't really need a separate editor to debug these. Like you've got syntax highlighting in here. If you do a wrong thing like this, so it gives you a helper that tells you what you did to mess it up. You can put kind of the equivalent of a console.log in here that'll log it out into that debug pane that we were looking into.
You do most of your work right inside this.
I do it right in here because you don't really need another editor to get these up and running. And you know, ideally, like you know how we try to architect things just as developers, you don't put a ton of stuff in one of these. So you know you want these to be more focused and more about, you know, getting one thing done and doing it well.
You host this on a Raspberry Pi, like the whole node flow of your automation type thing? Can that be hosted on Raspberry Pi? Or?
You 100% can. In fact, Raspberry Pi is like a first. Let's see if they don't have the nodes in here, but if you install it on Raspberry Pi, oh, there they are. So Raspberry Pi is very well supported by Node-RED. In fact, I think it comes default on the later versions of Raspberry Pi. And so you can directly access like the general purpose I/O on a Raspberry Pi with these nodes. So you could create your own like sensors and things like that for your house or for your business or whatever.
I was thinking the server.
But yeah.
The server being the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, it could certainly be the server, and you know, with a broker like Mqtt, you can split it apart. So you know, if you want to have multiple Pis doing different things, you know, so you have a little bit more fault tolerance, you can do that too. Sir.
Kind of extending this Raspberry Pi, but I work on industrial machinery, manufacturing equipment, and one machine I went in to modify, I noticed it had one of these industrialized Raspberry Pis with a compute module. So I was kind of curious what it was doing, and I looked it up, and it said it used Node-RED.
Oh, really?
It would read production data out of the main controller and transfer it to like a SQL Server database. Now, I looked it up and I seen the library, somebody had written a library, it's called a CIP protocol. Can you show how I would go about, because you showed like the libraries, how to
Yep.
Can you search CIP and then show me how to install that into Node-RED?
Let's
I'm
try it.
curious how they did this. I've never seen Node-RED until right now. I've only heard about it.
Let's see if it's out there.
Just search CIP, you should find, it'll say something about Ethernet IP, CIP, I think it's the very first one. It'll say,
Oh, there we go.
Bradley,
PLCs, yeah.
That's it.
So what you can do if you want to check this out, so let me show you one thing first. So in your actual flow, like this one, there is a manage palette. That's this guy. And so this tells me, I'm going to zoom in, this tells me the kind of like modules that I've already installed. So like, for example, I have Node-RED Dark Sky. Dark Sky gives me weather. So that way I can tell, you know, if it's raining or temperature or whatever like that. But if you click on install, this is the same set of stuff that we just saw in that flows. So if you want to install it in Node-RED, this is how you do it. You click on this, there's an install button, installs it, and you're done. That's literally it. But if you just want to check it out, like you don't want to install Node-RED, you can find it in the Flow library, and then if you click it, so it gives you kind of like a description, whatever documentation. Sir?
Shows you your command.
Oh yeah. You can. So that the folder that we were looking at that had the Node modules folder, you can go in that folder and you can do npm install, and that does the same thing as doing it from the command palette. So that's the install command. But from right here, you can see there's a link to view it on GitHub. So if you click over there, and all these are open source that are in that library. So you can just go out here. This is just going to be in JavaScript, and you can look through this and see what they did to decode that protocol.
So what about the sending the data to a SQL server? Is there nodes already in Node-RED, or is that nodes
You run
Node-RED
PowerShell
to
to do
do,
it,
or did they
probably.
possibly use an external application to send stuff to a SQL server?
That's a good question. Let's
I
look and
just use
see.
PowerShell.
Yeah, you could do PowerShell. You could do. Let's see. There might be a.
Or send it
You can send it to a web service, but
Well, I was gonna say, send it using MQTM, and then you don't have to worry about, and then the web service that's receiving it doesn't have to, or send it using a web service, and then you don't have to worry about reliability or any of the details of whatever Raspberry Pi or any device you've got on connected to the hardware.
Yep, for sure. You could do it that way.
Because that way you don't have to, that way you're not negotiating the whole detail. Too much work from something that's attached to.
Right, and let a bigger machine take care of handling that and dealing with SQL Server. But they do have nodes out here. So like there's one for this one for MS SQL. They've got Mongo, SQLite, Postgres.
So they could have potentially wired that CIP directly into one of those SQL nodes and
SQLite.
put some event thing and transfer it.
Yeah. So hey, you had this and you didn't even know.
I'd say it's my first time seeing Node-RED in an actual real application. When I seen that little, there's a DIN rail mounted, and I was curious. I took pictures of it, looked through the code to figure out exactly what they did. And this is the only time I've ever seen. So now I'm enlightened. Now I know what Node-RED
Right?
is and how they did it.
Mystery solved.
Yeah.
All right. Any more questions?
So what kind of security does authentication protocols does Node-RED support?
So Node-RED, you can set up like basic password access and stuff like that. I would recommend you handle that yourself through, like I use a reverse proxy at home, and I use Google authentication and stuff like that. So it does have some basic security stuff, but I would recommend if you're putting this in, especially a business setting, and you're exposing outside of the firewall, first of all, think carefully about that, because this is not like a hardened system. But secondly, I would manage that access in some other way, like through your firewall. But it does have basic stuff, like you can set up username, password. It does have some encryption. So like the thing I showed where it had my Gmail account, like it had the password grayed out there. That stuff you can set up to be encrypted because those configuration files are just text, just JSON. But you can encrypt that stuff too. That's a good question.
So is it locked down pretty well if you're using, say, Google Voice inside your home or on your cell phone? That ties to your Google account, I'm assuming, and then that from Google account. And then I'm assuming your Dialog Flow knows only to accept your and your wife's wives. Correct me there on that one.
All these wives I have.
Wives,
One is more than enough for me.
those two accounts are probably the only two that can send to that. That's all. I'm assuming that's how that works. Or
Yes, that's a good question, and I kind of do a trick. So normally with Actions on Google, you publish that to the world at large. So I could do that and then have some authentication to say, only allow these certain accounts. What I do instead, this is mine, and this is hers, which is just a copy of it. and I run these in a perpetual test mode. So like when we do a command, it says, okay, let me get the test version of whatever, and then it does the thing, which is a little bit annoying, but it keeps it off of the public internet, because I wouldn't even want to have it out there at all, just for people to be able to see what is available. But if you're thinking about doing this, for your business, that's not even a concern. But you have a lot of power, because those commands that come in through, let me see if we have one here from what we just did. So I'll log out these commands in debug. Nope. Well, let's do one real quick. So I don't think I ever turned off the garage light. Turn off. Okay, so turned off the garage light. Then if we pop over here, so this is the message that we got from Dialog Flow. So this is at like the very top level, but you can see if we drill down, this is the actual text that we got. Turn off the garage light. That's the action set on off. And like if we check out these parameters, this path, so this is kind of how I map these things together. So I say garage light, if Dialog Flow sees that, it maps that to an MQTT path, right? And so I'll send the value to the path. So I'll say garage switch commands on false. That gets picked up by the C# Windows service that manages all those Insteon devices, and then it does the serial port communication it needs to do to send the power line command, cut the garage light. Amazingly, it all works almost all the time. Okay, so for the final wrap-up.
So did you ever have, or fear what would happen if you were hacked through Mqtt?
No. I mean, it's a lot easier for someone to break my window than to do this. And like, if you're a person who can hack through, I'm not saying I have enterprise grade security, but I have some. If you have the power to do that, you can probably get a decent job making reasonable money, and you don't need to come steal my TV. So I mean, it's definitely a concern, like if somebody took a concerted effort, they probably could. I don't know, but so far I've been okay. Okay, so automation, it's what we do. Let's use its powers to make our own jobs easier. Node-RED is one of those things that is kind of like this glue that lets us tie everything together. It just makes it easier. It's not like a lot of things are already done for you. A lot of common things you're going to do, like the email, the HTTP request and response. There are a ton of nodes. We only looked at a couple of those. There are a lot of them in there. And MQTT is just an example of a messaging protocol. It's just a super lightweight one. It's the one I use, but probably a lot of you guys already use messaging. Like we use Rabbit here, so it's probably something that you're already familiar with. This is just like another alternative, a nice open source one. And so from these like simple pieces, if you put them together in the right way, you can make some cool stuff for home or for work. And that's it.